little bit of basic, just like how to set up some joints in Maya, and then attach some really basic controllers to them. So I have this like weird little person that I made, and I'm like, what the heck? I'll add some joints to him. So if you go under the rigging tab up here, just click on skeleton and create joints, and I pretty much, there's like a few settings in here. The only one that I ever actually pay attention to is the short bone radius, and that'll pretty much, so like right now if I make a joint, you can see that these little bubbles are like absolutely ginormous and just frankly kind of oversized for the skeleton. So if I change this to something maybe 0.2 and then create some more joints, you'll see that it is much more like reasonably sized to the body. So let's very cool. Get rid of those real quick, and then what am I doing? So I'll make some joints for the leg. So I'll put this person into wireframe. Just go to skeleton, create joints, and I'll just set up like a little hip joint here, a knee joint kind of right here, an ankle joint, and then a joint for the ball of the foot. And if the radius of the joint still feels off to you, you can go and modify it in your channel box here. In this case, I'm going to set this to 0.1 because I'm feeling kind of aggressive today. Really oversized joints are like one of my biggest pet peeves. I just like really hate looking for them. So you'll notice like right now this is really hard to see through this wireframe, and you can't see it through your you can't see the joints through your mesh. So if you go up to shading and turn on X-ray joints, it'll just show your skeleton through the mesh, which is super nice, super helpful. It just kind of makes visibility much easier. So some basic stuff about moving joints around. Excuse me. Pretty much you never want to touch the translation of the joint. If you do, it'll just like change where it is in space. It'll change the, I'll show you on the knee joint. It'll change like the physical length of the bone, which isn't what you want, because the beauty of joints is that you can rotate it and it'll like hold, you know, the length of the leg. Like if you can't shift your knee through space, and if you rotate your knee, it, like, your leg stays the same length. That's the beauty of joints, because it can recreate that behavior. So when you set up a joint chain, it'll, wherever you click first is the first joint that it's going to make. So in this case, joint 1, and then you click down the chain, and it'll just keep pretty much parenting joints under other joints, and it sets it up automatically. And that's what allows the joints to bend in the way that they do, because they're operating in local space because they're parented. So this translation is pretty much, so this knee joint is 1.242 units away from this hip joint on the x-axis, and that's how it defines space. If I were to shift P this and unparent it, you can see that the translates actually change, and that's because it's now in what's called world space, or it's going off distance from the origin now, instead of distance from this hip joint. So if I were to take this and press P and parent it back under it, you can see it goes back to 1.242. The second thing to be aware of is that your joints should always have a rotation of 0 for everything. Sometimes Maya does a weird thing, and it's like, hey, how do you feel about like a -0 rotation, right? That is not the same thing as 0, and I don't for the life of me know why Maya does this, but it does. And sometimes it'll break all of your stuff in, like, if you're doing some like more advanced rigging stuff. -0 values are weird. Also, every once in a while your joints will just like get messed up, and they'll end up with a value of like 0.02 or something like that for rotation, and that'll also break your stuff, depending on what you're doing. Yeah. Plug my computer in real quick. Yes, ouch. My cat is attacking my power cord now. Alrighty then. This is alive, computer. Yeah. Alright. I meant to do that before I started the video, but whatever. Alright, so the kind of the most annoying thing ever about joints is literally just like you just have to go through and name them. I personally like doing, so you label, like, obviously if you have, like, a left arm and a right arm, you want to label the joints so you know which joints apply to what. My personal preference is to do, just like an L or an R, and then an underscore, and then whatever the joint actually is. And that just makes alphabetizing stuff a little bit easier later, in my opinion, and I will get to that in probably another video. But yeah, so now you have this little joint chain, but how do you control it? The one thing that you pretty much never want to do, I mean, I do this if I'm just, like, posing a model with a rig, and I don't care if I can, like, go back and zero my rig out, but you never, ever want to animate by just moving and keying the joints themselves. That's, like, kind of a huge, giant no-no. So what you do is you set up controllers. Oh, and the other thing you should note is when I set up this leg joint, this is not, in fact, in a leg. So I'm going to just shift this into her left leg and once again turn on X-ray joints. So now that it is at least in her body, instead of floating awkwardly between her legs. So, to set up controllers, most times people just use little NURBS curves. So you can find that under the Surfaces Curves menu, this little thing for curves. Or you can just go to Create NURBS Primitives, and then they give you all of these random options. One option that I absolutely despise is the NURBS Square, because the pieces aren't attached together, which is just kind of gross. Like, if I'm just going to delete this. Yeah, you can see it's made of a bunch of different NURBS lines, which is just awkward to me. So there's a few different ways to create a square. If you want an actual square, you can go into Create, Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool, open up Preferences, and select Linear instead of Cubic, or Bezier, whichever. And what that'll do is it'll make straight lines instead of curvy ones. So if I hold down X, which is Snap to Grid, I can place a... wait. Oh, whoops. Because I'm in isolate perspective. Alright. So if I get rid of this, hide all of that. And also hide that. And get rid of that. Okay, cool. So I'm going to hit G and make a square. So if I go to Create Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool, open the preferences, you can see it's set to linear. And I'm going to hold X to snap to the grid. And I'm going to just click, 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 and click. And you can see that now I have like an actual square that's all perfectly connected together instead of being separate and weird. So the other thing that I usually do for controls, a lot of times for something like a leg, I want like a square controller, like something that is like a boundary to like I want something that kind of encompasses the whole leg instead of just like a little curve. So you can actually make square NURBS controls. Again, Create Curve Tools, CV Curve Tool, and then you pretty much just want to go through and like hold down V, and then click on each edge of the box laboriously, and it's a huge pain, but it will make you nice square controls. And it just takes forever, and it's kind of a pain. But if you want square controls, suck it up. And you can see that now I have, here's my nice NURBS square with this weird control point just going off into nothingness. And then once so I'm going to get rid of my original box. Stop playing. Okay, cool. And then I usually will duplicate this and then just like hide it, and then I have it if I need it to make little square controls. So in this case, I'm gonna once again hide skins. I'll take this little box, hold V, and then I'll just snap that to the joints, duplicate it, and just keep doing that. As you can see, I have all of these super lovely, nonsensical shaped boxes. So I'm gonna unhide my skin and just add the layer for my skin. And then I'll just set that to reference so I can't click on my mesh. Just make my life a bit easier. So then what I'm going to do is actually hide some of these because it's kind of hard to look at. So I'm just going to go through and take the control vertices of this weird square controller that I made, move them down, scale them as needed so that it kind of hovers over the bottom of her leg, right? And it's like, again, this is a personal preference. I will like take this extra time to set up the controllers because I personally like the way that it looks, and I think it makes my life a little bit easier. But this is like totally an optional thing. Yeah, so you pretty much just go through and like set all these up. I wish I could like stop time really quick and just like do that, but cool. So just assume like this is how you want it, and then I will I think actually just do some really basic just like circle controls. You don't need to watch me like perpetually just poke and hit controls. Shut up. So the what was I saying? What you want to do is, since I moved the control points, the pivot of each of these controls is still exactly at the joint, which is what you want. So what I'm going to do is just go through, select all of my controllers, and freeze all of the transformations. And that's a very important thing that you should do. Hide this old dude. So pretty much right now, so I can move this, but it doesn't move the joint. So what I'm going to do is just click on the controller, click on the joint, and then go to constrain. And since this is just like a hip joint, and I shouldn't really need to be translating this joint or like, you know, stretching the leg, I'm just going to use a simple orient constraint for that. I'm going to open my settings. I'm going to turn maintain offset on. I usually use that for rigging. And then there's some other options. Do you want to constrain all the axes, just X, Y, maybe just Z, etc. So I'm going to apply this, and you can see that it will now, when I move the controller, it takes the leg with it. So I'm going to go through and I'll show you an example of what happens if you don't use maintain offset. Yeah, it'll break your stuff. Again, this is the importance of maintain offset in rigging. So I'm just going through and selecting all my stuff and hitting G to repeat the orient constraint. So now you can see that you have this joint, but the leg still doesn't move as expected, and that is because right now what's happening is this top joint is getting the rotation from this controller that I'm moving here. And then this joint is getting the rotation from this control, which hasn't moved, and that's what's causing the leg to bend kind of weird and not follow the controllers. So all you need to do to fix that, take your joint or take your you want to parent all of the controls together, so that they're a hierarchy and set up kind of like your rig is. So I'll just take this one, then take the ankle constraint, hit P to parent them, and you can see that they're now parented together. And I'll just do that all the way up the leg. Oh, so don't accidentally delete your controls. And now when you move this joint, the controls move with it. Or when you move the controls, the joints move with it. And then you can animate these as you want, and key the skeleton itself. You can even hide the skeleton, and then that's usually what I do. I pretty much never have the skeleton active if I'm animating, because I don't find the need to. But here's where zeroing out your controllers comes in handy. So if I say you have this leg, and it's bent at some weird position, and you're like, I just want to take this person and make them go back to standing. What I'm able to do, since I have these controls, is just select all of the controls that you had, and zero out their translation and their rotation. Or I guess just rotation in this case. So just zero that out, and you can see it snaps the skeleton back to the original position. If I had not zeroed these controls out, it would have been an unholy nightmare to like get this back into position. I would have had to guess at the joints or like guess at the rotation values or whatever that would get me back to this point. So that's why you want to zero out your controllers. But that's pretty much how to set up like a real basic like real basic FK leg control, and then set up some random controls and attach them to your rig so that your rig moves when you move the controls. I shall be back in other videos with more advanced things, but for now, have fun and do the rigging things.